Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Showcase Kelowna event. And we're very excited to welcome all of our contacts from around the Kelowna area and the rest of BC. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ryan Butt, and I'm the Director of Partnerships and Events with LifeSciences BC. I'm joined on stage right now by Wendy Herbert, who's our President and CEO. So just some housekeeping notes before we begin. Please use the chat function at the side there. You can see Wendy's already posted a nice welcome to everybody. You can also see the list of participants who have joined us today. When you're doing the presentations, and right now you can see we've got a slide here about thanking all of our sponsors. To see that in bigger detail, just click on the top right to make it, we're top right 4 arrows, and that will go into full screen mode. We also encourage you to post questions and answers in the Q&A section. We do have a nice function called Upvote, so if there's ones that you would like to highlight for any of our presenters, please click on that and that will go to the top. We may not have time for a formal Q&A, but all of our presenters will be monitoring the Q&A to answer your questions when they finish their presentations. Also, afterwards, we're going to have a networking session. So when you go back, we're going to have 3 rounds of 8 minutes. What will happen is that we ask that all of you please stay at your table for the 8 minutes, and then you'll have an opportunity to move to another table. To move between tables, you just double click on the table that you would like to visit, and that's a good way to do it. For the structure, we would just ask everybody to introduce themselves for 1 minute, give any thoughts of the presentations, or if you're going to be at a table with the presenters, please feel free to ask them some questions. This is just a great opportunity to meet new contacts and reach out to people. And again, just a reminder to please wait for the break to move. Otherwise, it is a little disruptive to be moving in between before the 8 minutes. Also, we have our sponsor and partner areas. So if you would like to see our specialists from Silicon Valley Bank, BC Clinical Trials, the Michael Smith Foundation for Health Research, you can go into those various sections and meet with them as well. So I would encourage you to do that, as the speakers will be there and the presenters as well. Also, during this time, I'd also recommend, if you've not had a chance to do that, please upload your photo and your social media links so that people, when they hover over your face, they can see who you are, your position, and how to connect with you. So we have a very full agenda, so we're going to aim to wrap up around 10, and then we're going to go into networking for about half an hour. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to welcome your MC for today, Wendy Herbert, who's our President and CEO. Over to you, Wendy.
Thank you, Ryan. And welcome, everybody. This is our 4th annual LifeSciences BC Kelowna Showcase Series, and we're excited to be here virtually. While we're sorry that we're not here in person, one of the advantages of being virtual is that we're able to showcase the amazing life sciences research and innovation happening in Kelowna to people from outside of the area. So I'm pleased to say that while last year we all gathered together in person and had an intimate in Kelowna event, this year we probably have half of our attendees from outside of Kelowna. So this is the opportunity to put Kelowna Life Sciences innovation on the stage. As we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining this event from within the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territories of the Coast Salish, including the territories of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. Most of our Kelowna speakers are joining us from the traditional territory of the Salix Okanagan peoples. I'd also like to acknowledge that others are joining us from other traditional and unceded territories across this beautiful province and country. For those of you that do not know, LifeSciences BC is a non-governmental, not-for-profit organization. Our members consist of people from academia, research institutions, centers of excellence, and funding agencies, emerging small and medium enterprises, from digital health, medtech, therapeutics, and those organizations that support and provide services tailored to the broad life sciences ecosystem. We're funded through membership and the generous contributions of our sponsors and partners. And this event was made possible today by the following partners: Michael Smith Foundation for Health Research, Clinical Trials BC, and Silicon Valley Bank. Thank you very much for your investment in LifeSciences BC, and in particular, this showcase series. We're grateful for your support. At each event, we like to announce our newest members. So for today, I wanted to highlight these 4 companies that have recently joined LSBC: Fusion Genomics, Metamor Health, Shackelford Pharma, Silicon Valley Bank, and Scope Science, Libang Capital, and Senso. As a member-funded organization, we're always welcoming new members, so please reach out to any of us at LSBC or go to our website, lifesciencesbc.ca, for more information. So now on to the program. It's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Deanna Gibson. Deanna is an associate professor and associate head of research biology at the University of British Columbia, Okanagan campus. She's an experimental scientist who studies how the gut microbiome develops in response to the environmental question like diet and how this drives immunity. One focus of Deanna's research has been on how to improve diets for colitis patients, and she's currently conducting a clinical trial focusing on how the Mediterranean diet pattern reduces symptoms in these patients. She's also been working on improving the bioavailability of probiotics. She's created patented designer probiotics to treat various inflammatory conditions, including inflammatory bowel disease, diabetes, and neuroinflammation. She was the recipient of the NSERC Research Scholar Award, a UBC Killam Research Award winner, and the 2018 Canadian Association of Gastroenterology Young Investigator Award. Thank you, Deanna. The stage is yours.
You guys hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. We can see your slide.
All right.
If you can move into full screen mode.
Yeah.
Bottom right. Oh.
Okay.
There you go. Perfect.
Thank you so much for that introduction and the opportunity to talk about some of the microbiome-based therapies that we've created in our lab to treat inflammatory bowel disease. So the gut microbiome, which is a community of microorganisms, bacteria, parasites, fungi, viruses, has really been determined to be a major player in health as well as many diseases. And so it's a really interesting space to be in. Over the last few years, you can see if you follow, a number of startups have come about focusing on targeting the microbiome or exploiting the microbiome as a therapeutic. And so I got into this space as well out of interest, but really started to think about it as how we can solve various problems like diseases like inflammatory bowel disease. And when one has a number of diseases, including inflammatory bowel disease, there is an altered gut microbiome. We've termed that dysbiosis. And it's now really understood that this dysbiosis with somebody who has various diseases really can drive allergies, chronic inflammation, metabolic dysfunction, as well as a number of psychiatric conditions. And the question really is, can we change that? Can we change this dysbiosis through supplementation, say, of beneficial microorganisms? In other words, probiotics. Now, probiotics are very complex because they can elicit a number of various mechanisms generally supporting good health. And so they could be a potential biological solution for altering host immunity and metabolism. The problem is they're really not efficacious. So that means they really don't work that well clinically. And we started to wonder, well, why? And I think really one of the answers is because especially in a diseased individual who have inflammation going on in the intestine, these probiotics just simply don't colonize, they don't persist, and they just really don't survive. So we decided a number of years ago to try to figure this out. Well, can we improve the bioavailability of a number of various probiotics? And so I'm going to talk about one today and show some of our experimental results on what we call BioPersist. BioPersist is the E. coli Nicelle 1917 probiotic that we bioengineered to persist in a highly inflamed and oxidized inflammatory bowel disease gut. And we did that by adding an operon that simply allows it to have a selective survival advantage during inflammation and oxidation in this diseased gut. And we hypothesized that this BioPersist would be protective in a number of different colitis models that we have. So we tested a chemical model, and we also tested a spontaneous model of colitis. And I'm going to show you some of those results today. Now, BioPersist does persist in the colitic rodent, and you can see that on the graph in the far top left-hand corner, where BioPersist persists or is found 4 months after its inoculation into the rodent, whereas the parental strain, so the one that doesn't have our genetic modification, really does not, about 10% of the time. And when we put this in our spontaneous model of colitis, so this model will get colitis after about 4 months, and that's because these mice don't have a gene for mucin 2, and that mucin is really important in protecting against colitis. So they will get colitis, but we show that when we treat these mice very early on, so at about 3 weeks of age, by the time they're 4 months of age or 3 months of age, the BioPersist has very few clinical scores. And we know that they're protected from colitis because if you look at the rectal prolapse rates, we can see that BioPersist protects against any rectal prolapse in this model. And we know that this molecule called round beta, which you can see at the bottom in the middle, it's associated with damage in these mice as well as rectal prolapse. So rectal prolapse means bleeding from the anus, and that's really it's our humane endpoint. So it's one of the worst things that happens in this model. And that round beta is decreased with BioPersist, but not the parental group. And we know that this is associated with decreased inflammation because one of the primary immune molecules called interferon gamma is significantly reduced when treated with BioPersist. Now, we looked at this in the second model. This time, it's just a 1-week experimental model where we chemically induce colitis. And we see, again, BioPersist decreases histopathological damage. So the colons are not as damaged when treated with BioPersist. And we know that this is because it reduces inflammation because there's a decrease in neutrophils and a decrease in macrophages. And curiously, while it simultaneously decreases inflammation, which is damaging in a colitis situation, it increases protective responses like butyric acid, as well as this molecule called RAG3 gamma, which is really important for inflammation resolution. So it looks like this BioPersist not only decreases damaging inflammation, but it also increases protective inflammatory responses. And that balance is really, really important when talking about treating inflammatory diseases. Now, we also looked at the metabolomics. And there's a very complicated graph in the middle there with all of these dots. Really, all that is comparing the parental strain as well as our BioPersist. And we see that the BioPersist actually induces a unique metabolome. So there are 1,376 unique metabolites present when we treat BioPersist in this colitis animal. And I'm just showing you one example of one of these changes, but this happens to be within the cholesterol pathway. And BioPersist induces the reduction of the cholesterol synthesis in this pathway. So we don't exactly understand this yet, but it's associated with protection in these various models that I've shown you. Now, why I think this is interesting is because actually metabolism is incredibly important at the end stages of inflammation. And we know that inflammatory bowel disease, we've hypothesized, and we've written this review here that suggests that metabolic syndrome is comorbid with colitis and Crohn's disease. And we've drawn a diagram here to sort of indicate how this is, and it's generally through the gut metabolites. So this was really curious to us, and we actually tested in a diabetes model, and this was done in Dr. Ghosh's lab, where we showed that our BioPersist actually reduces area under the curve when we're testing glucose tolerance. So what that means is that BioPersist not only improves colitis, but it also improves glucose metabolism. And we know that this is through a reduction in systemic inflammation because TNF-alpha is reduced in the serum of these animals when treated with BioPersist, but not another probiotic that we created, which we call BioColonize. So that shows that this BioPersist is unique in its ability, not just any microbe can do this, but it's unique in its ability to improve potentially metabolic syndrome and type 2 diabetes. So our conclusions really is that bioengineering probiotics is probably a really great way to improve their clinical efficacy. And in this situation, we made bioengineered probiotics to colonize and persist in the diseased gut. And since so many diseases stem from the gut, this offers a novel therapeutic solution for many potential diseases. And the data I've focused on today is BioPersist, and when I showed you it protects against colitis as well as metabolic dysfunction. And with that, I'd like to thank the two individuals who created in my lab these designer probiotics, Artem Gadovani, who was a postdoc in my lab a number of years ago, and Sandeep Gill, a master's student, who was in my lab a number of years ago, as well as my collaborators, my entire lab that has helped me on this project, and the University Industry Liaison Office, Jennifer Lynette, especially Derek Gratz and Camille Saltman, who helped me navigate this space. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting and an area of great importance, as we all understand the importance of microbiome and the connection between colitis and some of the other chronic diseases is quite interesting. Our next speaker is Dr. James Miller, and he had been having some technical difficulties. So is he here, or should I move on to the next person? Ah, hello.
Hi, how are you doing?
Look at that. You're here.
What?
That's great. Okay, so I am going to introduce Dr. James Miller, our next speaker. He's a former professor in the Faculty of Medicine, an inventor, founder, serial entrepreneur, and financer of multiple successful medical device and life sciences pharma companies, including QLT, Inex, Techmira, Alon, and Exco. In addition, he's managing partner of Trium Bio and NDI Capital Technology Venture Funds, chair and director of multiple private and public corporations involved in technology, industry, and the entertainment sectors. He's currently focusing on one of his latest interests, precision medicine, and how it can change the course of healthcare practice, particularly its impact on the COVID-19 crisis and other forms of chronic disease. So over to you, Dr. Miller.
Thanks a lot, Wendy. Appreciate it. And thank you for organizing this forum, allowing the opportunity for some of the science and technology around the province to have a word other than just in Vancouver area. So I'd also like to put a shout out there to Ryan Butt, who has been absolutely phenomenal in terms of the logistical side of arranging these virtual meetings. It's quite a unique undertaking. So as I mentioned, we live in a chaotic and interesting times, and it's been our company's objective, that is Exco's, to address many of the healthcare issues that are arising either today and in the future. Hopefully I might be able to illustrate to you or explain to you some of the current buzzwords, i.e. like digital medicine, what it means, and what we're talking about in terms of precision medicine. Today, I've chosen to focus on our work on what we're referring to as the health patch. This is a product developed by our company. I would go back to the earlier slide if I could there. And just referring that to the health patch itself. And this enables us to acquire and deliver essentially very critical medical data in real time, 24/7 and virtually anywhere. This is being developed by Exco in partnership with a a group in the United States called Atlazo, who specialize in healthcare applications as well. And they, in fact, are the chip manufacturer side of the equation with our medical applications and sensor systems that we have developed. So the combination of these two is quite a unique joint venture interaction. The next slide, I think, begins to show you that COVID-19 is really, in fact, driving healthcare to the home. The demand has changed almost overnight, but the problem that still exists is that there's a lack of technology that allows us to address this demand. And the next slide, I think, is really indicating that COVID itself can become a catalyst, and in a good way. It becomes a catalytic event, if you want to call it that. It raises the awareness and the needs and demand of our current medical system and the applications and uses of that. In terms of remote healthcare or telemedicine, there's been a tremendous market growth over this period of time. Before COVID hit us last March, or earlier than that perhaps, 36 million visits were made through the virtual home environment. And now there's over 1 billion of these visits being made in the United States and Canada. So this is an amazing change in the market and the market demand. But as the next slide shows, I think we can get to the next one here, the telemedicine itself is really addressing only one part of the solution. And without the proper devices in the home, practitioners, that's the doctors themselves or the nurse practitioners, can only ask, well, how are you doing and how do you feel? They don't have the essential data to be able to back up their judgment calls that they have to make in terms of diagnosis or prognosis as to what you or the patient are undergoing. And so as a consequence, the next slide shows, I believe we got the next one there, is the need for data is really critical. This clinical grade data just is not available in the home today. And we're talking about clinical grade data that relates to core body temperature, blood oxygenation level, that's SpO2, heart rate variability, measures respiration, respiratory rate, activity levels such as sleep, motions, number of steps, your gait, and so on, as well as the ECG. These are really the fundamentals of a vital sign configuration that most doctors have in their little kit bag that they want to be able to access and know these very quickly. Those are really the need is for this data is absolutely critical, and it's very difficult to obtain in the current circumstances using just the straight telemedicine as we know it. In fact, 50–80% of primary care could be provided in the home if you were given the right tools. This is a very important point. The next slide shows you the aspect of this, which is the solution, which we hope is telehealth connects you to the doctor, but the data connects the doctor to you. And I think that is the important piece of the equation that needs to be recognized. The need for data and the data that connects you to the doctor to you. So the next slide really goes into how we're doing this and what our solution has been along those lines with the health patch. And essentially, as you can see on the model on the left-hand side, on her upper arm, the little patch up there on the top part, which is right here, that point is really, that's the patch, that's the health patch. And that delivers what we call critical medical data in real time. Like if I was recording it right now, I would be getting it, or anytime, 24/7 and anywhere from any place. So basically, we become almost the analogy to the FedEx of precision medicine. And when I introduce the concept of precision medicine here, I'm referring to, this is individualized. We're looking at individualized data, not normative data. We're not comparing you to the heart rate of 1,000 other people. We're comparing you to your own heart rate and what your basic level should be. The next slide would be showing you the health patch product line itself and how that works. So the health patch is really one of the first end-to-end digital healthcare systems that provides acquisition of data, analysis, the assessment of that, and then the access by a physician and or even by the patient to what they're doing. It's very simple and easy to use for data delivery. It provides the critical information that a telemedicine practitioner needs to have, the data that matches or exceeds what a clinic or hospital visit provides. That's absolutely important. And it empowers the patient with critical information to track their progress or their changes, or gives them alerts as to what the problems are going to be. And more importantly, it also reduces the risk associated with this and reducing costs, significant costs, with insurance liabilities, insurance companies from their own problems, their own pain points that they have. So I'd like to just go on to the next slide and show you quickly some of the pieces of this. This is the enabling technology. This is an all-in-one sensor system. This is a one patch sitting on your arm or on your chest, either place. And it contains, I think, some of the most unique technology available today in this whole area. It's a wearable design. It is a patient health care system on a chip. There's one chip that monitors the whole thing. And it is a clinical grade biometric analysis. It's always on. It has artificial intelligence associated with it, so it's always reviewing your data and comparing your data to the previous componentry of that. It's looking at multiple health sensor interfaces, so we can virtually put anything onto it. And you can have it fully supported with audio and voice control systems. It has a lot of electrical things that you don't necessarily are interested in from a communications perspective, but most importantly, it has also ultra long battery life. In fact, you can put these patches on either the arm or on anywhere on the body, basically, but the two sensitive areas are on the upper arm and on the chest area. And these can stay up there for 14 to 30 days. And we're putting these on not necessarily with Gorilla Glue, as some people suggested, but it stays on and you can take it off and then put it back on quite easily. It's a marvelous piece of technology componentry in that regard. So the next slide really shows you how it works. Basically, this is the health patch, and this is the case where it's sitting on the arm of the individual, and that is the patch that's sitting here, and this is it's artificial intelligence derived in that. It picks all this information up, the sensor information. It sends that information to your app, to your mobile app, and that your mobile system can be your iPhone or your Apple or whatever it is, and your iPad. It can be an Android. It doesn't matter what it does, and then that information is immediately sent to the cloud. From the cloud itself, this is the end-to-end part of the system. We've created a bioinformatics componentry to that through a highly secured system of information, and now allowing that to go to the next level, which is really sharing that for accessibility from either physicians and practitioners or from the individual patient themselves to see what they're doing. The next slide really quickly shows you the health patch products that we have. This is the first one that we're introducing along these lines for looking at COVID-19. And just remember that the COVID-19, the focus of that from a vitals perspective as a measure of pre-symptomatic initiatives and or follow-on initiatives of signs coming from a patient population, that core temperature, SpO2, respiratory rate, and heart rate are extremely important pieces of that. And those are the things, so these are critical signs of COVID, and those are things essentially we can monitor. We can monitor many other additional things that I could go into in some detail, but for now, that's the main one that we're looking at the moment, other than the fact that we're just wrapping up 3 years of work on a program for cardiovascular monitoring systems that we were doing in the European marketplace. So the next slide really goes to indicate to you some of the comparisons, I guess, if you want to call it that. You know, somebody can say, well, these already exist. Unfortunately, they don't exist today. These patches are not available anywhere in the market. There's no all-in-one patch. In many cases, these are systems that have silos associated with them. In other words, the silo is something that relates only the information as it pertains to cardiovascular application or cardiovascular or for temperature or something like that. Whereas in this one, it's an all-in-one sensor system. It's designed to optimize care. It's designed for the consumer healthcare marketplace, although it has clinical grade capability associated with it. It provides a whole new array of healthcare measures that are not available in other wearables. And it has the clinical accuracy and providing greater insight. The cost factor, of course, is also much lower, mainly because we can reduce this all down to one small chip. And that's really part of the unique features of it. The next one quickly just shows you, I think we'll wrap it up here, is the next, go to the next one. The cost factor is very low associated with these, and the leadership team is pretty extensive. I can go through just go to the next one. And the next one would be good. Move on to the next slide. Thank you very much. We're raising, obviously, we have a hunger for additional capital, and we are raising money in the marketplace right now to facilitate the further development of this health patch application. So with that, thank you very much. And I'm more than welcome to wander around the virtual room and see what virtuosity exists. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very, very interesting and very relevant innovation under normal circumstances, of course, even more now as virtual health continues to take off and likely stay around for a long time. So thank you very much. And we're going to move on to our next speaker. If you want to turn your camera off, Dr. Miller, I'd like to introduce Alison Orth, the unit director from Clinical Trials BC, who is going to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Wendy. Hi, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Devin Harris today. Devin is the Executive Medical Director, Quality and Patient Safety in Interior Health. He's been a practicing emergency physician since 2001. He was a clinical research fellow at St. Paul's Hospital from 2001 to 2003, and is currently a clinical professor in the Department of Emergency Medicine at UBC. Dr. Harris has taught medical students and residents and presented and published extensively. And we asked him if he would kindly speak to us today about clinical research and trials in interior health. And he is currently an investigator or a co-investigator on multiple clinical and health services research trials, mainly focused on cerebrovascular disease. Thank you, Dr. Harris.
Good morning. Thank you. And thanks, Alison, for the introduction. Thanks, Wendy and Ryan and LifeSciences BC for having us speak today as well. And I just want to acknowledge Interior Health Leadership, so our CEO, Susan Brown, some VPs who have oversight over our research program, which is Anuj Batra and Dr. Mike Rattel, and specifically want to acknowledge Dr. Dee Taylor, Corporate Director of Research, and Colleen Adderley, our Manager of the Clinical Research Office, who is in the audience and should be able to meet with many of you and answer some questions as well. So next slide, please. So I'm Nick, thank you. I'm an emergency physician who originally started research in the Lower Mainland and moved up to Kelowna in 2014, and we're on a number of clinical trials. And at the time was looking to transport some of the work that was down there in the Lower Mainland up here. The research department within Interior Health had been mature and had been moving along, but the clinical trial research aspects, this is interventional trials on human subjects, specifically, was in its infancy. And so as you can see from the timeline, it started in June 2017 with only 4 staff. And in 2017, September, only a few months later, activated our first interventional trials at Kelowna General Hospital, one a cardiac trial and the other one a neurovascular trial, which I was involved with as well. March 28th, it expanded to Royal Inland Hospital in Kamloops. In October 2019, the clinical research unit actually had and developed space within Kelowna Hospital. So this was fantastic in partnership with private donors and foundation and Interior Health as well. Has an outpatient clinic and 17 active trials at that point. And now we have 12 staff, 6 of which are full-time, and 23 active trials with regional and rural expansion as well. Next slide, please. The pieces to it really were dependent upon a number of things. And so what I'm going to highlight is the pieces around the strategy for development. And the first one is around a culture. So when we started back in 2014, 2015, there really was not a huge amount of research support and regulatory and operational infrastructure for running clinical trials. Within this, there was also lack of education for staff and investigators, and limited awareness and support for research with the management, senior executive, plus also those who would be primary investigators on trials. So the clinicians, medical staff, dentists who also can be primary investigators as well. But now, with the exposure to frontline education, interdisciplinary involvement in active trials, and with the development of research communication channels, and with the emphasis on the supportive role of the clinical research department, it has substantially taken off. And this has had a byproduct effect of education and training and awareness and interest and recruitment. Next slide, please. The other part is how we engage. So this was not only internal engagement within our leadership and within our physicians and medical staff, but we strategized around and really worked on fostering partnerships with many of you, external sponsors, and really looked to diversify the research portfolio. And with that, a lot of the work around our research department is patient-centered, patient-focused, and has patient input into what is of interest to locals within Interior Health, and what is interest to people from a trial perspective as well. This also, we provided equity of opportunity and quality for clinicians and investigators. If they had interest and were involved with something as a trainee in a center of Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, otherwise, and now moved here, we looked at each trial and tried to support them in an ability to do so. The next slide, please. The positive part around that is there's not a whole lot of competition for clinical trial research. When you're in Vancouver and the Lower Mainland, there are a lot of clinical trials being run where there's limited number of patients that could be enrolled. Whereas in Interior, we actually really did have an open area and an opportunity to really step into this space. It's integrated within our health system. So it's incorporated clinical research within our strategic goals. So as it pertains with IH strategic goals and where we really want to move with improved healthcare, that's what we've done with our clinical trial research as well. It has increased our capacity for rural, Indigenous, and patient-oriented research. Was recently on a stroke network meeting that's looking to really be a center of excellence for rural and transport-related stroke research, which can be informative for the rest of the world, truthfully, and being able to provide an equitable and distributed stroke model. Maximize the trial activity within routine care. We don't want to be an add-on because the business in Interior Health is really the delivery of healthcare first and foremost, and our ability to integrate clinical research within the delivery of healthcare is key for our success, and we've done very well with that. Further, as my role speaks to, I'm an Executive Medical Director for Quality Patient Safety, and clinical research as part of my portfolio is really a recognition that this is part of quality and quality work. So our movement to merge this with quality is informative, strategic, and leading, truthfully. We've prioritized patient opportunities and potential for improved outcomes during trial selection. This is part of the byproduct effect from being enrolled in clinical trials. And we utilize trial-specific education opportunities for long-term health system improvement. Next slide, please. I'll explain that last bullet. The Frontier clinical trial looked at providing a peptide or molecule in ambulances for treatment of stroke and prevention of disability from stroke as a neuroprotectant agent. This, as a byproduct effect, had significant impact on education of paramedics. So our stroke medical director within the Interior says that he has never worked anywhere that has such a high level of understanding from our paramedics around stroke symptoms and signs, and even finds at times that they do a better job at diagnosing and managing stroke than emergency physicians do. So it's quite a fantastic byproduct. And that capacity within education is really the improvement in health systems improvement that clinical trial research can really drive. Current challenges, I mean, this speaks to our ability for long-term funding. Some of our work, a good chunk of it is on soft dollars. Our geography, our rurality within interior health is not only a challenge, but it's an opportunity. So how we deliver clinical trials in a disseminated fashion really can solve a lot of issues for lots of other centers outside our tertiary and quaternary care centers. And our current crisis, I mean, previous speakers mentioned around COVID, which has really made us pivot in terms of what we can do for clinical trials. But the priorities in the healthcare system, such as the opioid crisis, is really directions as well. Next slide, please. In Kelowna General Hospital currently, we do have the clinical research unit with full service outpatient clinic. So this is for labs, biometric parameters, nursing assessments, interviews with patient rooms. There are 7 coordinators and a pharmacist involved in manager, and currently 16 active trials. In Kamloops, currently there's a non-clinical office space with 3 coordinators and 7 active trials. And we're very trying to foster and support clinical trial research throughout interior health. Next slide, please. The types of trials are shown here. So the investigators who really moved into this space early on were cardiac and stroke-related investigators. But as you can see, we have a significant number of trials that are related to mental health, substance use, surgical trials, renal or kidney trials, COVID-related trauma, and then others that are listed as well. Next slide, please. In 2020, some of the key milestones just to highlight, and the reason why we're happy and proud to present here, is our Clinical Research Expert Advisory Committee, composed of people like me for clinician-led research, really now is being structured from a governance standpoint to have oversight and input into what trials we will accept. Many of them are industry trials of which industry will approach us to be involved. The others are largely investigator initiated. So what's called Tri-Council grant funded CIHR and SHRC funded grants, where investigators will bring trials to see if they can be supported within the research office as well. And this group really looks at it from a quality and science perspective, and also from a recruitment and retention perspective, and patient and family interest. Our clinical trial management system allows for integration of all our regulatory, financial, and protocol processes now, which is standard. And then a clinical research special indicator flag, which from into our EMR or Meditech, we're able to see a flag that notifies clinicians of a potential involvement in trials to trigger those who are practicing and providing care to whether or not they need to screen or be referred to the research office or ask a research coordinator to come see. Next slide, please. So what's next? The moving to RIH as a full service clinical research unit, the enhancing of our rural community research channels and to build that equity, increasing the awareness within our senior executive and our senior committee to steer the strategic direction, so to further and foster the support from internally as this part of a key component piece for health system improvement. We're operationalizing clinical research space now in Penticton Hospital and looking at Vernon Jubilee Hospital for clinical research expansion as well, amongst other sites, having had a conversation a couple of days ago in Kootenay Boundary Hospital in Trail. Next slide, please. Where this really shows promise is our belief and integration of this as a critical component of a learning health system. So this really means where research is translated directly into practice, knowledge to practice and integrated learning directly as a consequence and in parallel to research. We're embedding it with a quality strategy and our analytics strategy as well. This is really a key piece for recruitment of medical staff and really is a piece of an engaged workforce where people are interested, have an interest in being part of the research, and for recruitment and retention. Our partnerships are a lot stronger with the Southern Medical Program, UBC Okanagan, Thompson Rivers University, and specifically have significant partnerships and strengthened relationships with the foundations and associations who have provided significant funding for research and really are moving the research strategy forward as well. And the key piece around this is person and family-centered care and patient engagement. Our partners and donors really are looking for areas where they can have an impact, and this is one where they can. And we're very open to that and supportive of that as well. And really, we're all in it for better healthcare, and this is one key piece for that as well. Thank you. Next slide, please. Appreciate it. Again, thank you to the organizers, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm open for questions later on, as is Colleen, I think, and others within the office. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Devin. Great presentation, and nice to see all the activity and advancement of clinical trials in the area. So please reach out to Devin during the networking to learn more. I'd now like to introduce Dr. Janetta Jones, VP Research from the Michael Smith Foundation for Health Research, and she is going to introduce our next speaker.
Yes, thank you, Wendy. Good morning, everybody, and greetings from Vancouver. I respectfully acknowledge that I'm a guest and visitor on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. I want to express my deep thanks to LifeSciences BC for organizing a fantastic event that highlights the vibrant research in life sciences in Kelowna. I'm honored to be here on behalf of the Michael Smith Foundation for Health Research. On a personal note, I moved to British Columbia 6 months ago, so I'm still relatively new to BC and Canada. I haven't had the pleasure of visiting Kelowna yet, but I'm looking forward to my first visit to the Okanagan in the coming months. For those of you who may not know about the Michael Smith Foundation, we are BC's health research funding agency. Funded by the government, the core of our work is to support health research talent. We help to attract, retain, and develop the talent that BC needs to advance knowledge, to strengthen our knowledge economy, and to move evidence into action for the benefit of all British Columbians. As a provincial health research funding agency, we recognize the importance of fostering health research capacity in all regions of the province. It's essential that we support research that is important to local communities, that we support local researchers, and that we work in partnership to strengthen local health research capacity in every region across the province. Since 2005, the Michael Smith Foundation has given nearly $11 million through 56 awards to local researchers based at UBCO, Interior Health, and Thompson Rivers University. But we know that we can do more. We want to increase the regional diversity of our funding programs and to fund more researchers in BC's interior regions. So we've consulted with regional colleagues and partners to implement process changes to our scholar and research trainee programs intended to improve the success of regional applicants. We are now accepting applications for these programs, and the guidelines for these applications are posted on our website. Now, what I really wanted to share with you today is to introduce you to one of our newest research trainees, Dr. Julianne Berry, who will speak to can bridging traditional and Western knowledge improve diabetes and obesity clinical health outcomes in urban Indigenous communities. Dr. Julianne Berry is an Indigenous scholar of Ojibwe ancestry. She has a Master's of Science and Biology degree and a PhD in Interdisciplinary Studies, Health and Exercise Sciences from UBC Okanagan. Julianne's main research interest is diabetes and obesity wellness promotion. Her past research looked at the effects of dietary fats and the role of different types of exercise on inflammation. As a postdoctoral fellow, Julianne is part of a collaborative project with UBC, Interior Health, and 6 urban Indigenous centers bringing together Western and traditional knowledge in diabetes and obesity wellness programs. She leads a study exploring the effects of these programs on point-of-care obesity and diabetes clinical health measures. Julianne is passionate about collaboration with Indigenous communities to improve health and wellness using Indigenous methodologies, knowledge, and practices. So it's my pleasure to turn it over to Julianne. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Janetta. Just want to make sure that everyone can hear me.
Yep, you're good.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So thanks again, Janetta, and thank you to LifeSciences BC for the welcome and invitation to speak, as well as Ryan and the rest of the organizers. So I'd like to respectfully acknowledge that I do work and live within the ancestral, traditional, and ceded territories of Syilx Okanagan Nation and the Thompson and Okanagan Métis Charter communities. First off, special thanks to all our community partnerships, especially our community members, our community research liaisons, community advisory teams, and center executive directors. Special thanks to our elder advisors, Elder Jesse Nyberg and Elder Jane Taylor, my supervisor, Donna Kurtz, and the rest of the Indigenous Health Promotion and Cultural Safety Lab, as well as UBC and Interior Health. I'm very grateful for my postdoctoral fellow to be funded through Michael Smith Foundation for Health Research, as well as through the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. So diabetes and obesity are rising worldwide. In Canada, 1 in 3 or 11 million adults have diabetes or prediabetes today. In addition, 6 in 10 adults live with excess weight. It is known that Indigenous people face disproportionate amounts of levels of diabetes and obesity. For example, diabetes rates are 3 to 5 times higher, the age of diagnosis is younger, levels have tripled for children, levels of gestational diabetes are 2 to 3 times higher, the prevalence is greater in females compared to males, which is opposite the general population, and the complications are greater and often more severe. As well, looking at obesity, compared to the general population, those Indigenous people living off reserve live with more obesity in both adults and children. So we know that this is not only affected by lifestyle and genetic factors, but also the impacts of historic and contemporary colonizations, such as loss of land, loss of culture, and loss of spiritual identity. Urban or off-reserve Indigenous communities often have less access to culturally relevant and traditional health and wellness services. This means they often do not access or return to Western mainstream health services, resulting in the progression and severity of illness and disease. Services for improved health and wellness should be holistic, culturally relevant, Indigenous-led, and community-driven. So in order to get to these healthcare services, research and collaboration is required. Research follows a good way. We follow Indigenous methodologies. This includes Indigenous-led research by and for Indigenous peoples, shaped by Indigenous knowledge, respectful, relevant, culturally appropriate, as well as collective. It's beneficial to the lives of Indigenous people. Our research is also guided by the two-eyed seeing, which respects Western academic and Indigenous worldviews. To see from one eye with the strengths of Indigenous knowledges and ways of knowing, and from the other eye with the strengths of Western knowledges and ways of knowing, and to use both these eyes together for the benefit of all. This was said by Mi'kmaq elder Albert Marshall. Embracing a vision for Indigenous health was a collaborative project with 3 friendship centers within the BC interior. Using talking circles, these communities let us know about their gaps, priorities, as well as needs to do with obesity and diabetes health services within the Indigenous community. Their collective vision came up with access to care, health education, cultural safety, community belonging and learning together, food security and nutrition education, and traditional healing, as all very important things to use within healthcare services. Building and acting on this vision brings us today to the Indigenous Diabetes and Obesity Health Project. This project is collaborative with 6 friendship and Métis centers, having expanded by 3 friendship centers and a Métis center, with the aim to bridge local, traditional, and Western knowledge to improve diabetes and obesity health and wellness services in urban Indigenous communities. The Indigenous Diabetes and Obesity Health, or IDO2, consists of community programs. These community programs are held at each of the centers and are all site-specific and community-led and community-driven. First, information was gained through talking circles and community gatherings around obesity and diabetes gaps, needs, and priorities. This information then informed the co-development of community program plans. This co-development was by the community research liaison. These are research assistants who are hired at each center by each center, also developed by the UBC and Interior Health Research Team, and guided by site community advisory teams. Facilitating this, the community programs held twice per year over 3 years, facilitated by the community research liaison, includes a sign-up day, 6 weekly education sessions. Using that two-eyed seeing, each session has a Western healthcare professional and Indigenous perspective. There's an activity, a final day, as well as 3 months following the program, there is another follow-up talking circle along with measurements. My postdoctoral fellow research is a sub-study of the IDO2 community program named the Point of Care Project. The Point of Care Project takes place in 2 of the centers, the Métis Community Services Society of BC and the Kelowna Friendship Society. The Point of Care Project runs alongside the IDO2 community program, where adult participants are invited to take part to receive measures at before, after, and 3 months. These include hemoglobin A1C, a lipid panel, glucose, waist circumference, as well as blood pressure. I use a point of care machine, and in this way, these measures are available immediately within the same visit, and I can discuss with the participant what these results are and what they mean within about a 20-minute span. The Point of Care Project is informed by community's recommendations. It is less invasive than phlebotomy completed at a local lab or hospital, completed within the urban Indigenous center, where Indigenous community members state they feel comfortable and culturally safe, and are immediately available to encourage the ownership of diabetes and obesity prevention and or management. So could including traditional knowledge into diabetes and obesity health services actually work? Diabetes in My Nation was an initiative in 2008. It was a community-based diabetes prevention and management program. And if you see here, levels of A1C, systolic blood pressure, as well as LDL were all improved within those taking part in this initiative. This supports the critical need to explore the effects of bridging traditional and Western practices on improving those diabetes and obesity health and wellness measures. So the Point of Care Project was initiated in March 2020. About 20 participants took part and completed the pre-measures. However, unfortunately, due to COVID-19 research closure, we did have to stop the research. Anecdotally, it was well received. The majority of participants who took part in the IDO2 community program wished to take part in the Point of Care. There was positive feedback about the immediate availability of results. The participants really enjoyed the Your Health measures with their health values written down and given to them to keep. You can see the Your Health measures here. Each measure is here with a lay summary. As well, there's a reflections and questions area, because we all know that sometimes we have questions in between, but often forget them. So this allows the participants to bring this back, and that way they don't forget those questions or reflections. So in conclusion, less access to culturally relevant and traditional wellness services, and individuals who do not access or return to Western or mainstream health services can lead in the results in the progression and increased severity of health challenges. Our projects aim to bridge traditional and Western practices, to increase access to diabetes and obesity healthcare services in a culturally safe space. Our outcomes are to reduce diabetes and obesity health inequities, and to provide evidence to support the change in policy, research, and practice. So with that, I'd like to thank you so much, and please feel free to include your thoughts and questions in the Q&A box or find me later during the networking. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Berry. And yes, please, everyone, please reach out to her. Very interesting work that you're doing, and important too. Our next speaker is Ann Woods. Ann is the Managing Director of the Life Science and Healthcare Practice for Silicon Valley Bank in Toronto, where she's responsible for leading the bank's efforts in this sector across Canada. Ann has close to 25 years experience in capital markets and life sciences. She holds a BSc from McGill University and an MA from the University of Guelph. She's also a CFA charter holder. Ann is a passionate advocate of the life sciences sector, volunteers her time with LSBC and multiple health sciences organizations. And thanks to Ann's leadership, Silicon Valley Bank is one of the sponsors of the Showcase series. So thank you, Ann, and welcome.
Thanks, Wendy, and thanks everybody for joining us today. So for those of you that don't know who Silicon Valley Bank is, we're a bank that's 100% dedicated to the innovation economy. So we started about 35 years ago in Silicon Valley, of all places, and we now have somewhere in the neighborhood of 25,000 tech clients, 4,000 life science clients, and probably the only bank in the world that really has a team of probably more than 100 people that's totally dedicated to our life science practice. So no other financial institution really understands how to work with life science companies the way we do. So as Wendy said, I'm based in Toronto. We actually just opened an office. Well, we hired somebody in Vancouver, so we're really keen on what's happening both in the tech and life science space in Vancouver. So one of the things that we have the privilege of doing is, because we have access to so many investors and so many early stage startup companies, it means that we're able to really gather some great insights into what's happening, both globally in the life science space, but also within Canada. So what I wanted to do today is just kind of really talk about the biotech boom that's happening right now, and just talk about some of how things have changed over the last little while, and how Canada and BC are faring in this in this global market. So if we look back over the last 10 to 20 years, there's really been a fundamental shift in how innovation and drug discovery in the life science space occurs. So there was a time when the big pharma companies or the big medical device companies, they really were the source of a lot of research and a lot of new discoveries. And now what we're seeing is that those companies are really focusing their efforts on late stage clinical development and commercialization, because that's really what they're good at, which has then shifted all of that really cool development, research, drug discovery to the small and sort of really early stage life sciences companies. And in fact, if we just look at biopharma alone, over 75% of the drugs that are launched by big pharma today were actually developed outside of big pharma. So it really is sort of a boom time for both for venture capitalists and for early stage life science companies. And so when we look over the last 10 years, how things have changed, in 2010 in the United States, if we looked at venture capital funds that were dedicated to life science and healthcare, they raised about $1.8 billion, which sounds like an impressive amount. But if we roll the clock forward to today, last year in 2019, funds that were 100% dedicated to life science and healthcare investing raised close to $11 billion. And in 2020, just the first half of 2020, over $10 billion has been raised by healthcare investment funds. So what we're seeing is both more and larger life science and healthcare dedicated funds, and generalists that are showing more interest in life sciences as an asset class. And one of the things that's really sort of been a factor driving the interest in the sector is the sort of lofty exits of the IPO activity. So companies going public. So there's been big acquisitions by and pharma companies, but there's also been over 100 companies that have gone public in the last 2.5 years. And so that's really drawn interest from investors that didn't typically look at life sciences as an asset class. And what's interesting is if we just look at the companies that have gone public in 2020, once they go public, the average sort of increase in stock price is close to 80%. So we're really seeing life science companies outperform. And you know, starting at, it seems like very far off for early stage companies to be thinking about that exit. But it's that's really driving companies to want to invest in early stage companies because they know there's that potential. So we know that that people are interested in investing in life science companies, and we know that there's lots of money out there to be invested, but what does that actually meant? So both in 2018 and in 2019, over $30 billion was invested into life science companies globally. And in 2020, already $20 billion has been invested in life science companies globally. And I think what's important to remember is, to comment on, is that this was happening, this momentum came before COVID. If anything, COVID-19 just really solidified life science as an asset class to be invested in. And I think the other thing that's come out of COVID is that governments are now maybe finally starting to look at healthcare, not as a cost center, but as an area for investment. So that's really great news for the sector. So all of this says globally, there's absolutely a biotech boom. So how is Canada faring in this? So if we look at some BDC data, what we can see is that life science funds have been their best performing funds, outperforming non-life science funds by 2 to 1, so twice as good of returns. We also saw over the last 6 years, 4 times as much capital being invested in life science companies. So $270 million in 2013 and $1.1 billion in 2019. And if we look at just the first half of 2020, private venture capital investment was over 700 million, and we saw an additional 500 million come from public equity markets, so companies that have gone public. So, you know, when we look at how Canada sits kind of globally, what we can see is that we really are punching above our weight. So, you know, 6% of the global dollars invested in life science are going into Canadian companies. And if you think of us as 3% of the global economy, we really are punching above our weight. So nationally, things are great. But what we really see is in BC, that's really driving what's happening globally, or what's happening nationally, sorry, in Canada. So life science is one of the fastest growing sectors in BC. And while it's third in Canada in terms of number of companies, it's actually first in terms of growth. But when we drill down into some of the details and we look at the investments, we see that BC really has an outsized amount of venture capital dollars going into life sciences. So nationally, 15% of venture capital dollars goes into life sciences. In BC, 40% of venture capital dollars goes into life sciences. So that really talks about BC as a hub and an area that people are looking at, not just Canadian investors, but also US investors. And the other thing that we see is, without question, the largest companies and the companies that are attracting the greatest amount of money are all in BC. So, you know, companies that most of you have heard of: Zymeworks and Xenon, Aurinia, Sierra Oncology, Chinook, Aspect, AbCellera, that's been in the news many times with their partnership with Eli Lilly on a COVID treatment. So really, you know, what does all of this mean? You know, it means that BC is really providing the rest of the country with that sort of cornerstone or foundation as a life sciences hub. So, you know, great science, great research institutions. But now what we've got is a real core group of biotech entrepreneurs that have a track record of success, that are going to be able to kind of, you know, spread across the country and work with other early stage startups that are going to really take Canada from, you know, where we are now to a global powerhouse, and you know, why not be the sort of, you know, third big biotech center in the world. So I think with that we can safely say the future is bright for life sciences in BC, and I will hand the floor back to Wendy.
Great, thanks, Anne. Actually, you're getting Brian instead of Wendy, but I should talk about some upcoming events. But thank you for that wonderful presentation there. Also want to thank all of our speakers, Dr. Gibson, Dr. Miller, Dr. Harris, Dr. Berry, and Ann Woods. And it's been a real privilege to host the event, to sponsor the amazing life sciences innovation happening in Kelowna. And all of the presentations were very inspiring, and I learned a lot today. The Showcase Series is a program where Life Science BC, with our partners, travels, this year virtually, but in past years in person, to different locations throughout British Columbia to showcase life sciences and research and innovation. This Kelowna event is only made possible due to the generous support of our partners, the Michael Smith Foundation for Health Research, Clinical Trials BC, and Silicon Valley Bank. I would also like to invite all of you to attend our next Showcase Series, which will be coming up in Surrey on December the 8th at 3 o'clock. In addition, you can see shortly there's going to be our upcoming events. So I would encourage all of you to attend them that are coming up. Especially, we have our Spotlight series with Sativa coming up, and also with a new organization called SAS, we're doing about analytics in healthcare. The Showcase Series event in Surrey we talked about. And for all of you who are looking for investment, the JP Morgan conference in January is going to be an excellent opportunity for that. And we have our Career Connect Day presented by BioTalent Canada, which will be our virtual job fair and meeting with that. My colleague Sue Callahan is here today, so I would recommend, if you're interested in learning more about that event, please see her during the networking event. And last but not least is our largest conference of the year, Access to Innovation, February 24th and 25th. And our next slide is really going to thank all of our sponsors. And what we really want to thank is especially our platinum sponsors, Ferris, GSK, Janssen, and Pfizer, our gold sponsors at Mare Bioinnovations, Blake's, Innovative Medicines Canada, and Stem Cell Technologies, as well as all of our silver and bronze sponsors, who we greatly appreciate all of your support. As we said, we are fully sponsored. We fully rely on our sponsors and our members for support. So if you are not a member, we encourage you to reach out. My colleague Peter McLaughlin is here today, and he'll be happy to talk to you about becoming a member of Life Sciences BC. So without further ado, we're going to turn this over now to our networking. We're going to have 2 rounds of 8 minutes. So when we go into the tables, please sit at the first 5 or 6 tables. Please fill them up first. You have 8 minutes to introduce and meet everyone, and then you will see a timer go off, and then we'll switch to the next one. So thank you again. If you have any feedback, please reach out to myself. You all have my email, and let me know. So without further ado, enjoy the networking and have a wonderful rest of the day. Take care then. Bye-bye.